Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. How's it going? I built all this for $167. It's construction grade lumber I bought at Lowe's down the street. So I wanted to make a video on how I built and finished it, and hopefully you guys can learn a few things from it. If you guys want to do me a big favor, subscribe to this channel, like this video, really helps me out, and it allows me to make more videos just like this and show you guys how not to build things. Let's go ahead and get started. The first couple things I'm going to mention here are going to sound extremely obvious, but I need to go over them because I overlooked them a couple of times just in my last few projects, and it ended up just costing me a lot more time than if I had just taken a few extra minutes and done it right at the beginning. So first things first, obviously, when selecting boards, wherever it is that you get yours from, making sure they are quality boards from the start is going to save you the most time. So no cracks, no major bends or bows or cupping going on in the wood. And then second, moving into when you get them home and start cutting them down, take some extra time, measure twice, cut once. But when you do cut, make sure that you're cutting very accurately. Just spend a few extra seconds setting up that saw and making sure that you're cutting it exactly where it needs to be. If you're doing multiple cuts, using stop blocks and matching all of your pieces so that they line up well and you're getting a good square flush trim fit, whatever it is that you're putting together, you want it all to line up very nicely. Next, to make my furniture look a little bit nicer, I do spend some time using either CA glue or wood glue and sawdust and wood putty to fill in any holes in the wood. I also like to glue in knots. This just helps, especially when wood sits outside for a while. The knots can become loose and fall out, leaving a big void. So doing this ahead of time, gluing everything in place, is going to make the whole thing look better and last longer. Something else I like to do to make the furniture look a little bit better is to hide all exposed screws. I know it is outdoor furniture, but I think doing something small like this can really make it look a lot better in the end. Also, if you're using this method that I'm showing on screen here, where you use a countersink drill bit and you drop your deck screws in there, fill it with some glue and put a dowel in there, let it dry. Man, one of the most satisfying things about this is flush cutting it with this saw and then sanding it down, getting a nice smooth finish. It's super fun. If you've never done this, I highly recommend it. It also makes your furniture look a lot better. Speaking of sanding, I'm sure you knew this step was coming, but putting in the time and sanding, working through the grits is just gonna completely transform whatever project you're working on and make it look 10 times better. So I know people do different things. Some people say don't use 80 grit on pine because it's too soft. Some people say that's all they do is use 80 grit on pine. In my experience, if I get construction grade lumber, I'm always using 80 grit to take care of any milling marks or any dents that are in the wood. This just gives me a clean slate to start from, and then I can go to 120 and then up to 220 if I want to at the very end. I do spend a little bit more time making sure that any surface that's going to be touched, when you're sitting on it, with your arms, legs, hands, I spend more time on those and work up to a little bit higher grit. That way you just get a really nice smooth finish. It actually makes the chair, the sofa, whatever you're making, more comfortable to sit in and very smooth and pleasant to use. I also make sure to sand everything before I put it together. This saves a ton of time in the end. You're not trying to get your sandpaper inside of little tight corners, and that just honestly can make lines and make everything look a little bit worse. So do as much sanding as possible before you do any assembly on your furniture. So when actually assembling the furniture and putting it together, I use Titebond 3, which is their waterproof glue, as well as deck screws that are rated for outdoor use. This will ensure that the furniture is a lot more sturdy and can last a lot longer outdoors. Speaking of using screws, when I do pre-drill the holes, which I highly recommend doing, it'll really save you from splitting a lot of the wood. But I use a counterset drill bit when I pre-drill all my holes in the boards. That way when I use these big deck screws, they sit in the wood nice and there's no splintering from the screw head pushing in too hard on the wood on the surface. I do use pocket hole joinery when making outdoor furniture. However, it's not super sturdy, especially if there's going to be a lot of weight on it. So in any boards that are actually supporting most of the weight of whatever I'm building, I always use 2.5 or 3-inch deck screws from the inside out. That way they are hidden and out of sight, but this makes the whole structure a lot stronger. The last thing you would ever want is for someone to sit on your chair and the bottom go out from underneath them. Speaking of sitting in your chair, go ahead, take a seat. Test it out. This is actually a very important step. You have to be able to fall asleep in every single piece of furniture you make. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, sit in your furniture, see if it's comfortable. If it is, great. If it's not, make some adjustments, and the next chair you build, try to build it a little bit different. So let's move on and talk about how I'm going to stain the furniture that I've built so far in this video. This is my first time trying this Minwax pre-stain. This is the water-based version that they have. I will say right away, I did this incorrectly. You're supposed to spread this on, let it sit for up to 5 minutes, wipe off any excess with a clean rag, and then do not let it dry. You're supposed to let it sit for about 30 minutes before it's completely dry, and then put your stain on while it's still damp. I did not do this. Like I said, I did it incorrectly. I let these things dry overnight before sanding them. I guess the next time I do this, I'm gonna try to do it the correct way, still sanding it while it's damp. But hopefully you guys can learn from my mistake. And if you try using this pre-stain, read the label better than I did. There were a couple dents on the top of the table here after putting it together. I put some pine colored Minwax putty inside the holes. I'm gonna let that dry overnight, and then I'll sand it off with, 120, and then I'm gonna go over everything with 220. But I did wanna mention one thing. These are very porous woods and they move around a lot. If you've worked with this at all, you know how, one day they can be perfectly straight. You take them into a new room or into your garage and all of a sudden they're all warped and bent. So there's a lot of DIY products out there where you're actually butting up like the wood together without any gaps. Something that I learned, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but especially with outdoor furniture, if you're using a soft wood like pine, like I am here, you have to allow it room to move. So all that being said, I wanted to show you something that I did just a couple weeks ago. I saw a DIY project on the internet and I'm like, I'm gonna give that a shot because it looked pretty cool, doing a flush tabletop like this that you would normally see with hardwood and not necessarily pine. The design I got had me drill all these pocket holes, put glue in between the seams, press it together, and at first it looked great. I was super happy with it, but right away the next day, the whole board bowed. I'm not sure if that's even showing up on camera, but if you were to be in the room with me right now, here you go. So this wood moves so much. I would highly recommend, if you're making furniture out of it, to always leave a gap in between the seams. That allows for the wood to expand and contract. And yeah, this just doesn't seem like the best way to go about putting pine together. But like I said, this is just my experience. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. This makes more sense for outdoor tables too, because water can fall through the seams and not sit on top as long. So I wanted to mention that. Hopefully that's helpful to you guys. As cool as it is to get that flush tabletop, I don't see it being a very good option for building outdoor furniture, especially if you're using construction grade lumber like this, made out of pine. So something to think about. But let's go ahead and cut to tomorrow when we get to finishing all of this and we actually start putting some stain on. I ran out of 220 grit sandpaper, so I'm using this 3M Cubitron 240 grit sandpaper instead. It's fine, we're close enough. Like I said, I did this completely incorrectly. I let that pre-stain dry completely overnight, so I did this a little bit out of order. But anyways, it all worked out in the end. You'll see in just a minute here. I wanted this to be more like a beachy vibe, so I thought we'd do like this teak oil finish. But after putting it on, I realized that this uncolored teak oil didn't really change the look of the wood at all, and was not happy with how that was gonna look. So I went back to how I finished the Adirondack chairs just a couple months ago. These turned out nice using some Valspar outdoor deck and furniture stain. The color I went with was called Chocolate Chips, and I just applied this exactly how I would if I was painting anything else with regular paint. However, the only thing I didn't like about using this was when I put it on, it just looked like I was painting the wood brown. So playing around with this a little bit, I ended up using just a dry rag to wipe off all the excess that was on top after letting it sit and soak into the wood for maybe about 5 minutes or so. When I did this, I noticed that the grain of the wood was revealed and it gave it more of like a stained finish. I was curious to see if this was going to decrease the durability of the stain on the wood and make it less waterproof. So I actually did some tests a while ago where I did this exact method, and then I dumped a bunch of water. I set cups on it and left the standing water on the wood for a few days. And then I let it sit outside. It got snowed on, it got rained on, the sun was beating down on it. And I was actually really impressed that even when I would wipe off all the excess with the rag so that I got that grain pattern back, it held up just as well as if you would leave it on. So in my experience, this is not going to hurt the durability of the furniture. When wiping the excess off with the rag, I would have to swap the rags out fairly frequently just because they'd get so damp and they'd lose their effectiveness. But I also made sure that I was always going with the grain as much as possible. If you don't do this, you can kind of see some patterns build up, especially in the corners. So taking a little extra care, go around the corners, clean up any excess, that way everything looks as uniform as possible. I also did the same thing to the bottom, covering as much wood as I could, just so that everything was waterproof. And to get the little holes, I'll show you right here, I use Q-tips to get in there. Well, I guess you can't see because my big head's in the way. But I use Q-tips to get them inside the holes. This makes it look better in case anybody peeks under the furniture. It also will help preserve the wood. This will be sitting outside and water will get everywhere. So this makes it look nice and also perform better. And after I go over the whole thing with the roller, I follow up with the brush just to get in those nooks and crannies and get everything covered. You don't want any unstained pine showing. This obviously will make it look a lot less professional. I did the exact same thing to the chair that was part of the outdoor furniture set I was building. And then it was finally time to do the table, which was the last piece of furniture. Now, at this point, I had already screwed and glued the tabletop to the table base, so there was no taking the boards off. But in hindsight, I definitely should have finished the tabletop, each board individually, before attaching it to the base. Getting in between the grooves was just a pain and took way too long. So definitely make sure you finish the tabletop boards before attaching it to the base. And yes, I did leave that spot in the table unpainted, just so I could annoy any of my OCD friends out there who might be watching this video. And hopefully from this camera angle, you can really tell what I mean by getting the grain pattern back. It looks like it was just painted brown with just a hint of grain. And then when you wipe off all the excess finish, you just get all that natural wood look back. And for it being just construction grade lumber, I gotta say I'm pretty happy with the way this tabletop turned out. You can see what I mean here by finishing the boards to the tabletop before mounting them and attaching them to the table base. Ruining a paintbrush and trying to shove it there in between the cracks just was not ideal. After being very thorough and covering every piece of wood, wiping everything down, getting all that excess off, everything was finally finished, and here's the final result. Hopefully this helped you guys out. You learned from my mistakes, and let me know what you guys think of the way it looks in the comments. I'm gonna be selling this on probably Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist just to see, what the going rate for this would be. If you guys want to know what I sold it for, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. I'll put the handle up here and in the description. As soon as I sell it, I'll let you know exactly what it sold for. If you guys like this video, check out this video over here. I'm sure you'll like this one too. Hopefully you guys can build something like this for yourselves. Enjoy some good family time on the back patio, watching the sunset in much warmer weather, unlike we're having right now. I think it's 8 degrees outside. You can see my breath in here. I've even got my heater going, but until next time, go build something cool.